Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Wayside Women's Series Echo. We're really excited today to have Chris Kelly here to present and talk about recovery community organizations. Let's do some introductions first. My name is Lucia. I'm the Education and Prevention Coordinator at Wayside.
Chris Kelly. I'm a woman in long-term recovery. I was with Minnesota Recovery Connection for 5 years, and so hopefully you're going to get to know a little bit more about the recovery community organization model today. Cool.
We have in the room also Rebecca. You can see her hand.
There it is.
Rebecca also from Wayside, and we have James. James has a hand too.
Another one.
He's IT for Wayside. I'm just going to go around how I can see it. Jesse, do you want to go ahead?
Yep, Jesse Everett's from Wayside Recovery Center as well, from one of our other locations.
Mary Jo? Mary Jo, I think that your mic is muted. If you could press it and unmute it, then we could probably hear you. There we go.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I see that it's unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Mary Jo, do you want to type into the chat maybe a little bit about yourself, and that way we can all get to see who you are from that? And then, yeah, Maria, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Maria with Mothers First.
Hi, Maria. Melissa, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. She did in the chat.
I see you in the chat, Melissa. Yeah, you're muted. That's okay. And then we have C. Palacios. If you could unmute and introduce yourself. Chanda from MIWRC. No problem about low tech. We're glad you're here. I might have said your name wrong. I'm sorry. And then our rope key. I also might be saying that wrong. If you want to unmute.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Repke, also from MIWRC.
Oh, hi, Rebecca. Thanks for being here. Okay, so Chris is going to take it away, and if you guys want to jump in and ask questions, you can unmute, or you can chat it also and ask questions, and then we'll just go from there.
Hi, thanks for tuning in today, and I hope to keep this informational, and do feel free to type in a chat with your question if you found yourself on mute, and I'll answer questions as we go along, so you don't necessarily have to wait till the end. Otherwise, I'll just kind of go for it and hopefully do a good job explaining the recovery community organization model to you. So what are recovery community organizations? The first slide up here will be her second slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is an RCO, what are the core elements of a recovery community organization, how and why they're formed, and how many there are in the U.S. I'm not sure how to work this, James. Do I just press it?
Left click on the screen. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So what is a recovery community organization? So we are all independent grassroots nonprofits led and governed by the local recovery community. So we're not, recovery community organizations don't promote a particular pathway to recovery. So that's a important thing to understand about the model, is that when people come into a recovery community organization, they're asked, how can we support your recovery today? And if somebody really doesn't understand that question, meaning they haven't chosen a particular pathway, we explain to them that we take a person-centered approach. So what's most important, because they are the experts in themselves, is that they draw the map of what their recovery is going to look like. And then our role as the recovery community organization is to help guide them along that map and help to take down barriers and then increase those resources that are going to help them on their pathway. So our services are peer-based or non-clinical. So again, we're not licensed clinicians, but they're going to be services provided based on lived experience rather than a clinical treatment program. And then often recovery community organizations bridge the gaps in the system. So the gaps we see, oftentimes someone will say, hey, I need some help, and there's a wait time before they can get any assistance from their managed care plan or even a Rule 25 assessment here in Minnesota. Then they might get that assessment, and then often there's typically a 2 to 3 week wait for individuals to get into treatment. And then we often say, leaving treatment as well, there's gaps in services. And so recovery community organizations are places where people can get those supports around that clinical treatment program. And then the last point there is led and governed by the local recovery community. So the people that work for us and with us are all engaged in the local recovery community. And we define the recovery community as the people in recovery, their friends, their family, and the professionals that serve us. So it's a broad definition. It captures lots of people, and that's really intentional because we need as many people on our team as possible. There was just recently a study put out that there are a fair amount of people, actually a majority of people, who are technically in recovery but don't even identify as being in long-term recovery. And so we need to capture those voices as well if we're going to start to impact the policies that actually govern all the services that we have. So that's a little bit about kind of the why and how recovery community organizations are formed. So we do require even that our board of directors are either in personal recovery or family members of people in recovery. And part of that is a requirement of keeping our membership at through the Association of Recovery Community Organizations. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. I'm clicking two things. So what is a recovery community organization? I like this definition because it's from 3 people that I look to that are founders of the movement. So Phil Valentine, William White, and Pat Taylor. So the sole mission of an recovery community organization is to mobilize resources within and outside of the recovery community to increase the prevalence and quality of long-term recovery from alcohol and other drug addiction. Public education, policy advocacy, and peer-based recovery support services are the strategies through which this mission is achieved. And so it starts to touch on the 3 primary things that a recovery community organization does. So we talk a lot about public education. So a lot goes into starting to break stigma around what addiction is and what recovery looks like. So you'll often see people, I should have worn it on my other shirt, but wearing pins like this beautiful pin here. This is what recovery looks like. So that whether I'm on a bus or in a grocery store, at a school function for my daughter, I'm really representing the recovery community and showing people that people can and do recover. Policy advocacy. So public education is important because it leads to policy advocacy. So we know that public opinion really influences public policy. And so it's important that we address the public education issues so that we can start to change policy. We know in 2008 there were great strides made with the Mental Health and Addiction Equity Act. And that was just a start. But what we saw, being it's coming just on 10, or now it's 10 years old, although this law was passed that mental health and substance use disorders are given the same type of support as other chronic diseases, it really hasn't been implemented. So we haven't held the managed care plan their feet to the fire to make sure that we're provided the support that's required by law. And then the last one is peer-based recovery support services, and kind of being familiar with all the names on the board. I feel like everybody is really, most of us here are peers. And so it's that because of our lived experience in navigating through different services, that we are then able to provide support to others and really do that strengths-based approach. So again, that we fully believe that people come to us with what they need to recover, and we're just there to help them uncover that. So there are 3 core principles of a recovery community organization that distinguishes us from other organizations. So recovery vision. So again, keeping that that vision of recovery in the forefront of everything we do. That notion we'll hear often, nothing about us without us, or recovery works, or this is what recovery looks like. So it's creating that expectation. So a lot of our systems, as we know, we come into, don't necessarily always have that vision in the forefront. So we'll hear things like, a relapse prevention program, say, versus a recovery management program. So we want to use really positive language, and we want to always, we want to kind of dispel the myth that, relapse is a part of recovery. It doesn't have to happen, and we don't have to set up those expectations for the people we're serving. Authenticity of voice, and so that leads into what I talked about earlier with being led and informed by the local recovery community. And so we have things like community advisory boards, and now a peer support alliance. So there's many ways beyond that board of directors that recovery community organizations across the nation really bring in voices of the recovery community, so that the services we offer are tuned in to that local recovery community. And so it's not just about an executive director or program directors making choices for new programs or new avenues or things that we're going to do as an organization, but it's calling upon a broadly cast net of voices from across the recovery community when we want to change our services, or when we're thinking about getting some grant monies, or really everything we do, that we're reaching out to that local community and say, does this make sense? Is this what our community needs? And are we really just using the voice of the recovery community and kind of their asks and their needs to guide where we go? And then accountability to the recovery community. So ultimately, we're here to serve the recovery community. And so we have, again, different measures in place to ensure that all the work done for a recovery community organization comes back to meeting the needs of that local recovery community. I hope I'm not talking too fast. So we touched on this earlier. So 3 primary strategies used to achieve the mission. So public education and awareness. So again, that breaking down stigma, letting people know that people can and do recover. Oftentimes we see a lot about addiction in the news, and I feel like it's more prevalent than ever, and it could just be because I'm seeing it. But we see pictures of pill bottles and needles and things that can be really harmful and triggering to the recovery community. And so not only do we have an obligation to call those things out and correct the misuse of language, not in a newspaper article and magazines and even on the local news, that we have a obligation to educate and say that a term like addict could be really harmful to some, because that's a heavy label to wear, and that we can start to refer to people as an individual with a substance use disorder and use that person first language, that we can bring an awareness that, again, by introducing ourselves. I love introducing myself as a woman in long-term recovery, because I feel like I'm a great role model, and I feel like I really represent the community well, and I show people that with the right resources, the right timing, and in the right dosage, people can move on to become contributing members to their community. So I pay my taxes, I vote, I volunteer, and I do really awesome things in my community. And that's what happens when people are given a life in recovery. And then advocacy, really we do a lot. All recovery community organizations belong to the Association of Recovery Community Organizations. So that's through Faces and Voices of Recovery. So it's a national advocacy organization, and it's a place where we gather annually and then take monthly phone calls. So we keep on the same track all year round, and we talk about what's going on with public policy. So we recovery community organizations had a big part in getting the CARA passed in the 21st Century Cures Act. So a large part of the funding that a lot of us have grants for, like the STR funding, so the state targeted response grants, the peer enhancement grants, was really the work of recovery community organizations at a federal level, saying that we need to support recovery in the community in addition to the supports that are going into treatment. And then peer-based recovery support services and activities, I'm sure we know a lot about. A lot of recovery community organizations have systems called telephone recovery support, or programs called telephone recovery support. And so those are different than a warm line or a crisis line. So individuals can sign up for this service, and they actually get a phone call once a week from a member of the community who's also in recovery, who's done some training through that recovery community organization. And so again, versus sometimes, again, that phone can get really heavy when you need some support, and we might hesitate to reach out and ask for help. And so we kind of turned that around, where RCOs make the outgoing call to that individual and check in with them once a week. I know at Minnesota Recovery Connection, people have been on the phone list for 7 years. So for 7 years, free of charge, they've received a phone call once a week from another peer in recovery. And a lot of times it's just a short, nice conversation saying, hey, how are you doing? Do you need any support from us around your recovery? Or just a lot of people just want to talk. And so
Right.
I feel like that's really actively working against the people have to get worse before they get better. So it's working against that. You have to hit rock bottom before you can start to get support and services. So right now, I didn't put any pins on the map, but we're looking at some recovery community organizations across Minnesota. So it's been an exceptionally exciting couple of years for RCOs, because if you didn't know, we've added some just in this past year. So Minnesota Recovery Connection serves the Twin Cities metro area, so the 7 counties. Our telephone recovery support services go across the state, as well as we've done trainings in Fargo and Duluth, St. Cloud. So we take our Recovery Coach Academy mobile, but as far as our kind of given area, it's the 7-county metro. There's mental health resources through Minnesota Alternatives in Spring Lake Park has a peer center, so a peer support center, and they are now officially a recovery community organization. There is Recovery is Happening in Rochester, and so they serve the southeastern 10 counties of Minnesota. There's We Recovery, or Beyond Brink, in Mankato, so they came on just a few months ago as a recovery community organization. Continuum Care Center came on just weeks ago in St. Paul, and then Recovery Alliance Duluth serves the St. Louis County area. And so that's an emerging recovery community organization. And now I know of 2 more in the Twin Cities area that are emerging. And so I think what we're going to see is more and more counties funding recovery community organizations to start to bridge those gaps between assessment, clinical treatment, and then the kind of what's next. So creating safe spaces for people to go and really cultivating that recovery soil for people to return to after a clinical treatment stay. So what is peer recovery support? So again, it's designed and delivered by people who've experienced both substance use disorder and recovery. We often get a lot of questions around kind of what is long-term recovery? When can I call myself being in long-term recovery? At what point can people provide peer support? Do they need to have 1 year, 2 years? Minnesota Recovery Connection asks for 2 years of experience or in problem-free recovery in order to go through the Recovery Coach Academy. And right now the state mandate is to have 1 year of, I think it's substance-free, one year substance-free in order to provide support as a certified peer recovery specialist. But when people call and ask me, I really talk about, I don't think my recovery at least wasn't a linear process. And each time I accessed recovery, I learned a lot, whether it was 2 months or 6 months or 2 years. And that time didn't go away just because I didn't maintain abstinence. So oftentimes I learned a lot by navigating that space of coming in and out of recovery. And so when I look, I might have a consistent 10 years of substance-free, problem-free recovery, but I actually have many more years if I look back to kind of when my addiction really started, and all those years I navigated that space. And so what's most important for peer support is that someone understands how to navigate that space, and they can identify when they're in trouble. And, a lot of times we can be abstinent and probably not be able to provide really solid peer support. And other times we can be 6 months into our recovery and we're ready to go through a training and provide that support and care for others because of our previous experiences. It's important that peer support is delivered by peers who have been successful in the recovery process. So again, not only that direct support, but the systems. So I think it's important for peers to have a place in helping formulate the position descriptions and have some agency in what providing support within organizations looks like. Because again, because of our lived experience, we've all been through that process. And so we have a really vital voice in what providing recovery support services within organizations looks like. We embody a powerful message of hope as well as a wealth of experiential knowledge. I often tell people that most of my teachings came from my real life and not from a book. So I might have gotten a degree in human services, but really what benefited me was years of navigating different systems, oftentimes as a single mother, and learning how to do things kind of boots on the ground. And that is what I turned around and was able to share with people as a peer through Minnesota Recovery Connection. And again, it's non-clinical, and we use recovery capital as a lens to identify different assets and then recognize barriers that need to be addressed in a person's individual recovery process. So again, recovery capital is external, someone's internal and external resources that they need to be successful in recovery. And there's things like a recovery capital scale and plan and ways that peers can help the person they're working with, the recovery, identify areas where they have a lot of strengths and some areas where they need some assistance, and to have that recovery capital built up. And then peers can effectively extend the reach of treatment beyond the clinical treatment setting into the everyday environment. So again, it's wonderful that we have pretty robust access to treatment here in Minnesota. But oftentimes our families and our friends think, okay, we went away to treatment and we come home and we're healed and we're cured. And often we come back to environments that may have us re-engaging with people or behaviors or places that kind of line us up to go back to return to use. And so it's important that we mobilize peers and we get them active in the community. So again, that we're tilling that soil and we're getting the community ready to receive people who have achieved recovery in a treatment setting and now are ready to live out that recovery in the community. So why do we do peer recovery support services? So peers, again, we're concrete proof that recovery works. I mean, there's nothing to me more effective than meeting someone who's been through the process and they're sitting there in front of me, and suddenly not only do I believe it, but my friends and family members do as well. The first year I worked for Minnesota Recovery Connection, I took my parents to the Rally Caps for Recovery game, and my dad got on the train with me, and everyone in our train car was wearing the bracelets for the game. And so he just looked, and he said it was just like, you found your people. Like, here's this community of people that are all supporting recovery. And that was such a cool moment for him. So it was, not only is it concrete proof for us people who might have experienced addiction, but it's concrete proof for our friends and family members that people can and really do recover. Peers are exceptionally effective engaging people who would otherwise not choose to access treatment. So again, people who, our systems call it denial, but oftentimes it's just that they're in that pre-contemplative state, or that pre-recovery state where they're not quite sure, because that's a really scary, bold move to take, to say, I'm going to come into a life of complete abstinence, because I have no idea what that looks like. And so the more we can surround people with others in recovery and just make it accessible to them, the better chance we have of helping them navigate into that safe space. And we know how to, again, experientially, we know how to navigate the health and human services systems, because we've all done it. And we know how to advocate for ourselves. So not only do we teach people how to navigate those systems, but how to advocate for themselves within those systems, and remind them that they do have rights and they do have a voice, and that because they had a life in addiction doesn't mean that they have to face certain adversities or discrimination within our social services system. And then the experiential knowledge of peers complements the technical and clinical knowledge within treatment. So again, peers aren't here to overtake the treatment system or to replace our clinicians, but we're here to support that and really help people in spaces when they're not in that clinical treatment meeting. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So when they're not meeting with their counselor one-to-one, we can have peers all around our workplace, so that they're connecting with people over lunch and on a break, and available maybe when their clinicians wouldn't be available, such as evenings or weekends. Peers can kind of saturate a place with recovery experiences. So, I'm sorry, do I have till 12:45?
12.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, 12:40,
Okay.
12:45. Yep.
Okay. So what is a peer recovery specialist? And so we're really focusing on peer recovery specialists for substance use disorder. So we're considered personal guides and mentors, connectors. So we're really instrumental in helping people connect to housing, employment, and then other professional and non-professional services. And we are a liaison between informal supports, resources, and recovery supporting activities. So oftentimes our peers are going with people to a meeting, or going with people to even a ball game or a football game or a hockey game, or something that they used to love to do, but maybe it's not a recovery conducive environment. And they're thinking, oh gosh, now I can never go see a live music show again because I'm in recovery, and that's one of my favorite things to do. And they can bring a peer with, and suddenly have these experiences of things that brought them great joy and pleasure, but do it safely because they have an accountability partner with them at those events. And then that person can stay with them and do those things until they feel comfortable doing it on their own. So when to start peer recovery support services. So we talked a little bit about pre-recovery. So that's a stage where we might not quite recognize that there's an issue going on. It's kind of the nail in the middle of your head theory, that everybody else can see what's going on and this is the problem, but maybe I can't recognize that yet. And that's a great place to start to surround people with recovery conducive environments. So again, I'll say recovery is contagious. And so if we can start to bring people in that pre-recovery phase around other people in recovery, they might just see that the change isn't impossible, and that there's these people that are laughing and having fun and they're in recovery. Recovery initiation is going to be that stage where they start to ask questions and where they start to talk about what's going on, and might even give some clues around, yeah, I do want to go to treatment, or yeah, I do want a different lifestyle for myself. Recovery maintenance, the last three there, recovery maintenance, enhanced quality of personal family life and long-term recovery, and then breaking the intergenerational cycles, are all really experienced outside of clinical treatment. And similar with pre-recovery. So if we kind of look overall at our funding streams, a lot of it is geared towards that recovery initiation stage, which is just one of 5 stages of recovery. And so if we look at recovery maintenance, so what do people do to stay in recovery? I can think of hundreds, if not thousands, of different ways that I've seen people maintain their recovery, from really formal supports to, baking, boxing, meditation, yoga, all sorts of different ways. And then we see that enhanced quality of life. I know certainly in my own life that my family life has drastically improved over the last 10 years. And now I'm a support system to my parents, my siblings, my child, to my partner, and then to my local community. And then the breaking intergenerational cycles. And I think that's important to remind people when they're in that recovery initiation stage, because sometimes the shame and the stigma that we face around our addiction, and then as we learn more about it, we kind of end up, at least for me, I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do to my daughter? Because she was 6 when I came into recovery, and quickly realized that the life I was giving her of having a mom in recovery was just as, if not more, powerful than the life she experienced when I was active in my addiction. And so we have an opportunity as people in recovery to start to break those intergenerational cycles by giving our children a life with a parent, loved one in recovery as well. We provide vital social support. So we do emotional support. I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with displaying empathy, caring, concern. A lot of people just need to be heard. They need a safe space to be heard and someone to listen. A lot of places we go want to look at our problems right away. So they want us to kind of give them our list of problems, and then they'll give us their list of solutions. And so that's what's cool about peer support is we're there to take that strengths-based approach, and we're there to start to ask the question of, let's look at what's right with you. Let's look at what's going well in your life, and remind people that they're more resilient than they probably believe. We do a lot of informational support. So whether it's acquiring new skills, life skills, employment readiness, restoring people's driver's license or their voters' rights, these are all really important components to being an active, contributing citizen. And so we don't dismiss any of that, and we see the value in each of those things. And we can provide instrumental support. So it's really important that people, especially if they've had a kind of a career in addiction, so spent most of their adult life in addiction, may not have had access to learning things others of us take for granted. So they may not know, how do I create a budget or pay my bills on time or fill out a application, much less make a resume. Those things can be really, really overwhelming. And so peers can sit side by side with somebody and really help them go through those different tasks, and even identify, here's a list of things I want to do, and things that might be necessary for a successful life as a contributing citizen. And then that affiliational support. So opportunity to establish positive social connections is really important. So oftentimes we, might have a clinical treatment stay, but we really don't come home to alcohol and drug-free environments. And so what does that look like for somebody in recovery, coming into recovery, and how can we create more welcoming spaces where if people want to again, socialize and have fun and go to movies and go to games and go to shows? How can we start to create more spaces where that's possible? My friend and I were just flying together, and we're just amazed at the places that even at like the Starbucks, it was like, here, get a glass of wine and take one with you. And we were talking about like movie theaters now serving alcohol, and all these places where really that used to be drug and alcohol free, and mostly alcohol free, that where alcohol is coming into the picture. So again, as a recovery community, we have to use our voices to start to press back against that and say, these used to be safe spaces for us where we could go to a movie and not sit next to somebody drinking a glass of wine. That could be a really triggering or just upsetting experience. And so again, we can mobilize our community to start to speak out against that, because nobody's going to speak up for us. It's important that we use our voices once we're kind of on the other side and really active in our recovery, to start to press back and say, is it really necessary to have alcohol at every turn of every event? Or can we have some safe spaces for people in recovery to go to have some fun and socialize? This is probably my favorite definition I've ever read of recovery, that was created just by a group of individuals, and Gail put it out. But to live an ordinary, meaningful life guided by their own choices in a local community or neighborhood. What I really like about that definition is that I think it just hits home. And that's mostly, I know for myself, that's all along my path. That's really what I wanted, was just an ordinary, meaningful life. I used to call it normal, but I don't believe in normal anymore. So, but just to be a member of a neighborhood, of a city, of a state, of a nation, and feel connected to other people, and to feel like I had a voice and some agency in what my life would look like moving forward. And I think peer support is a way that we get at the root of that, because the more peers we can train, the more peers that we can recognize, the more times we can tell our stories of being on the other side of addiction, the more we start to normalize it. And as we kind of normalize this disease, we suddenly can have our whole self served by our healthcare systems and by our social service systems, rather than believing that this part of me, this addiction, or now oftentimes mental health issues, have to be served over here in a separate space than where the rest of me is served. I think I'm going to stop there, because I go into kind of organizational development after this, but sure. I think that gives some people time to ask questions if they have them.
Okay.
Yeah, unless nobody has questions, I can go on to integrating peer support.
Do we have questions? It looks like up at the top right.
Oh, sorry.
In the chat, but there was one that I missed.
I have a question, although maybe you're going to go into it next, Chris, about, seems like there are a lot of barriers put in place legislatively or by laws and rules to coming up here, and maybe more and more of those, like they've increased the amount of certification and those kinds of things, or that you have to be certified or so many numbers of hours. Is there anything that MRC is advocating for, ways that we can reduce some of those barriers to becoming a peer recovery specialist?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to celebrate that it's been recognized, and then to look at the next legislative session. So again, it's up to us as community members, as the peer support individuals, to put forth legislative efforts to say, here we want fair wages, we want livable wages, and we can question those certification processes. So statutes aren't I don't know if that's right, but written in stone, meaning they're changeable. And so we can go out and advocate and have our voices heard, but that's really going to take effort. So things like our Peer Supporter Alliance is a good place where we're gathering different individuals, anybody who's been through any sort of training. It's not just for substance use disorder, but any sort of peer support training, so that we can gather and start to say, what are the needs of our emerging workforce and what are the barriers we're facing. And then it's up to us to take those to our state representatives and start to have a voice there so that they understand what the needs of this community are. And so community health workers, a lot of community health workers belong to unions. I don't know if that's a direction peer support will ever go, but it's important to identify that we're our own advocacy group. So in that sense, it's up to us to stay gathered and communicate and talk about really ways we're going to mobilize our own community and then ask for things to change. We're looking at, for the Peer Support Alliance, inviting peers in to discuss individuals who've done the set-aside process so that we can at least start to have some kind of that boots on the ground peer support for peer support about how to go through a set-aside process if you have a previous conviction that would prohibit you from working in a 245G facility. And start to look at ways then how can we leverage that and those voices to go to our lawmakers and say, hey, this isn't going to work out because so much of our community that should be providing the support is going to be not allowed to provide that support because of their criminal history while they were active in addiction. Yeah.
Does other people have questions? You can chat or you can unmute yourself if you want.
I have another one. I'm wondering about how you've seen the use of peers shift with generations and with, I think apps and like all this, the new stuff that's out there and ways connecting is maybe different than it has been. And what are you seeing either NRC or other recovery community organizations do that's responding to kind of the younger new generation's needs for peers and ways they're using them?
Yeah, I think what's exciting is I feel like the community, I feel like the younger generations don't ask for permission. And so they just boots on the ground make it happen. And so we have things like Sober Squad through the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe that's now just thousands of people across the state, and they've created ways to support people. So anyone in the state can be a member of their Facebook group, and someone says, I need a ride to treatment that's 200 miles away, and you see literally 20 people respond. Just community members respond and say, I got you, I can do it, and they coordinate it. And this is just like that underground that's happening. And so what I'm seeing is kind of our state agencies and different government organizations are recognizing that and starting to look at like, wow, what's going right there? Because they're actually being super responsive. And I think it's groups like that just taking charge and saying, we're not going to ask for permission because we're not asking for dollars to pay for this. Because you know what? We're a community and we got it. We got each other. But now the state's paying attention and saying, wow, they're actually meeting the needs of this community and doing it across the state without super coordinated efforts, meaning for state agencies to come in and kind of control and manage and fund and make things reimbursable in that. So I think there is that grassroots effort that's getting recognized. I think we're seeing a ton of apps, and if even if you're reading through like the NIDA and the National Institute of Health, and we're really starting to creep into public health. And so I think that's important too, because public health has had great technical advances over the years, meaning they know how to manage chronic illnesses. And so they're starting to apply that to substance use disorder and mental health. And so a lot of it is us being invited into new spaces, again, because we've been kind of typically siloed off as here's where you go and deal with this mental health and substance use disorder. And then here's where you go to deal with any other chronic conditions. And so we're being invited into those spaces. So as providers, as community members, I think it's really important that we continue to have a voice in those spaces. And when we're invited, come to the table and have conversations. And then telehealth is just going to, I think in the next coming years, just really, really, really become a main way that especially younger generations, telehealth and then texting support, that they communicate with peer support. And so we see apps like Recovery, and there's different ones that are just kind of breaking the mold for how we've typically provided services. And there's some great apps in mental health coming out. So it's that kind of help on demand. Like, I need help right now, not tomorrow and not a week from now, but I need help right now. And these apps are able to have community members then come in and provide that support right now. And so that's really exciting. And I can't imagine that the healthcare systems aren't paying attention. So I know they're paying attention to that.
Looks like we got that person there.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any suggestions about funding/billing for peer recovery coaches, grants, or ability to bill through direct access?
So are there any suggestions about funding billing for peer recovery coaches? So the, as we know, Medicaid funding was approved on August 15th, and the policy and procedures being written right now. So we'll hear more from the Department of Human Services about that in the months to come. So what we know is that with the most recent federal legislation, a lot of doors were opened around peer recovery support. And so now I believe it'll be called SOAR funding. The grants haven't been released yet, but because of the legislation, the bills were passed. Now they'll start to put funding into those bills at a federal level, and then that money will come to states, and then the states will put out the request for proposals to respond to those grants. And so again, over the coming months, we'll see grant dollars really aimed at community-based peer support systems. And because there's a ton of places that won't be funded by Medicaid billing. And if we really think about it, someone has a fair amount of privilege even to get to the point of being in a treatment facility, post-assessment, funded by Medicaid, and then having access to peer support. And even through a recovery community organization, you have a fair amount of privilege to be in that space, meaning I've been able to navigate through several barriers in order to be here. And I don't think we're addressing the 9 out of 10 who don't make it to that space. And so, again, I think it's going to be up to the community, up to all sorts of community organizations, not just recovery community organizations, to see those grant dollars as an opportunity to provide peer-based recovery support services kind of across the board to people who it wouldn't be accessible to otherwise. And I don't know about, I think we're a ways off from being able to bill, meaning having peer support being billable through managed care plans or Medicaid ever independently, not through a bigger system. But I think we can advocate that it's that we open it up to more than 245G and RCOs as far as who can bill for vendors that can bill for peer support. I think we'd be really wise to open up that Medicaid billing to hospitals and primary care and all sorts of different facilities.
Thanks, Jesse. Anybody else have any questions they can think of now? Okay. Well, thank you to Chris.
Yeah,
thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Okay, evaluations. I will be sending those out. And then sign-in reminder.
Well, we've got everybody.
That's all. We have all of you there.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to invite people to future ECHO sessions. You can email me and I can add them to our serve list if they have questions. And then our next ECHO is going to be on December 6th, and it's going to be a presentation by Mothers First. And then just also a reminder, December 20th, we won't be having an ECHO. So thank you for everyone to coming.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
There's the hand.